In October 1993, following the death of a Harlem, New York drag queen, friends cleaning out her apartment stumbled upon a disturbing discovery. Following Dorian Corey's death, those sorting through her belongings came across a large trunk that had been stored away for years. Inside, to their horror, was a mummified body. The condition of the remains immediately posed challenges for the investigators, as the body had been concealed for a really long period of time. The body was badly preserved, making it hard to figure out even the most basic facts such as identity or cause of death. The natural process of mummification had left little usable tissue. There were no immediate leads, no identification documents, and dental records could not be matched. At first, it seemed the mystery of the trunk might remain unsolved. The police had to turn to unusual forensic methods in order to move the investigation forward. One of the most striking techniques involved extracting fingerprints from the mummified hands. Chemically treating the stiff, dried fingers allowed the investigators to soften the tissue enough to press workable prints. This breakthrough provided the first real opportunity to connect the remains to a known individual. The investigators also examined the items sealed within the trunk for clues about the time frame. Among the contents were pull tabs from beer cans, a design no longer in use by the 1980s. By establishing that these tabs dated back to the 1960s and 1970s, the police were able to estimate how long the trunk and its grim contents had been hidden. Every small detail offered a new piece of the puzzle. Eventually, after painstaking work, the body was identified as Robert "Bobby" Worley. This identification connected the remains to a man who had once lived in New York decades earlier. The revelation brought clarity to a mystery that had lingered since the trunk was first opened. But it also raised deeper questions about how Bobby had ended up in such a state and why his body had remained undiscovered for so long. At some point, Bobby made his way to New York, though the exact timing of this move remains uncertain. His brother had already relocated there in 1956 and Bobby followed later, though the gap in years makes it unclear when and why he decided to make the transition. This move would mark the beginning of the life he built in the city, one that would later become mixed up with both crime and attempts at stability. In 1963, Bobby's life took a dark turn when he was arrested for assault. The arrest led to his incarceration at Sing Sing Prison, a place known for housing some of the state's most serious offenders. His time behind bars would last until 1966 when he was granted release. After leaving prison, Bobby appeared to take steps toward building a new life. He secured work as a building superintendent for an apartment building on Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem. At some stage following his release, Bobby went to stay with his brother in the Bronx. It was during this period that he began using the name Bobby Wells. Whether this name change was meant to provide a fresh start or to distance himself from his criminal past is not definitely known, but it marked a shift in how he presented himself to those around him. The identity of Bobby Wells became his new face to the world. The investigation in 1993 revealed that he was fatally shot in the head. This fact transformed the discovery from a bizarre case of concealment into a matter of a violent death. Though the body had been hidden away for years, the gunshot made it clear that Bobby's death had not been accidental. The police eventually learned that he had last been seen by his family in 1968. This big gap between his disappearance and the discovery of his body in 1993 reinforced the likelihood that he had been hidden in the trunk for decades. For the investigators, the timeline was consistent with the beer can pull tabs and other dated evidence found alongside the remains. Speculation began to circulate about what might have happened inside Dorian's apartment all those years ago. One main theory suggested that she may have shot Bobby in self-defense during a violent fight or attempted robbery. Given the discovery of a gunshot wound to his head, this scenario seemed possible. If true, it could explain both his death and the decision to conceal his body rather than report the incident to the authorities. Accounts from friends and acquaintances added further weight to the speculation. Several described Dorian and Bobby as having had a turbulent and often volatile relationship. Alcohol was said to play a role, with heavy drinking at times making conflicts between the two worse. These recollections, while not conclusive, painted a picture of a relationship marked by instability and potential danger. Despite these reports, no criminal charges were ever filed against Dorian. The lack of direct evidence, combined with Dorian's own passing before the body was discovered, left the investigators without the ability to pursue the case further and is thus closed. In November 1993, Bobby's body was buried in Hart Island, New York. Hart Island has long served as a potter's field, the burial ground for unclaimed or unidentified individuals. With no family members coming forward to claim his remains, he was buried there, marking the final chapter of his life in a place known for anonymity and forgotten histories. In April 1994, a mother and daughter disappeared from Charleston, South Carolina. Nearly 20 years later, the truth surfaced on Australia's Sunshine Coast. Savannah Catherine Todd was born on May 6, 1993, the daughter of Dorothy Lee Barnett and Benjamin Harris Todd III. Harris was a financial advisor while Dorothy worked as a flight attendant. At first, their lives appeared typical of a young couple starting a family. But trouble had already been brewing behind closed doors. Dorothy and Harris got married in December 1991, but the relationship soon began to unravel. Arguments and tension overshadowed the marriage, and the bond that had once brought them together steadily weakened. What started as marital struggles eventually grew into disputes that neither could fix, setting the stage for a painful separation. As the marriage fell apart, issues of mental health began to surface. Dorothy faced difficulties that were brought into question during the legal proceedings. These concerns became a central part of the divorce process, and they directly influenced the direction of the custody battle that followed. The private disagreements of the couple soon became matters of public record inside a courtroom. After Savannah's birth in May 1993, custody became the primary issue between her parents. Both Dorothy and Harris wanted to raise their daughter, but the courts were tasked with deciding where the child would live. Testimonies, evidence, and concerns shaped the decision, making the custody hearings highly contentious and emotionally charged for everyone involved. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of Harris, awarding him full custody of Savannah. Dorothy was not completely cut out of her daughter's life, however. She was granted visitation rights every other weekend, a decision meant to maintain Savannah's connection with her mother while securing stability under her father's care. On April 24, 1994, when Savannah was about 11 months old, Dorothy picked her up for a scheduled visitation. What should have been a routine exchange between parents turned into the beginning of a long nightmare. Instead of returning her daughter at the agreed time, Dorothy disappeared with Savannah, leaving Harris waiting in vain. The scheduled visitation ended with silence and absence, not with the child being brought home. When she failed to bring Savannah back, Harris immediately contacted the authorities. His worst fears had been realized. His daughter was gone, and so was her mother. Soon after, Savannah was officially listed as a missing child and identified as a victim of parental abduction. At first, the Charleston County Police treated the matter as a custody violation. Parental disputes were not unusual, and law enforcement initially approached the situation within the framework of family court issues. But as hours turned into days, it became clear that this was more than a local custody problem. Dorothy and Savannah could not be located, and the nature of the disappearance raised the level of concern dramatically. The possibility of false identities came under serious consideration, especially given Dorothy's previous work as a flight attendant. Her background in aviation, coupled with her ability to travel, left the authorities fearing that she could bypass normal restrictions and possibly even leave the country with forged documents. Within days of the abduction, the investigation was escalated and handed over to the FBI. The case now involved crossing state lines, and the potential for international travel made it even more urgent. In the months that followed, the investigators chased down tips suggesting that Dorothy had gone to Texas, Florida, or even Boise, where her mother lived. Dorothy and Savannah remained missing, and with no confirmed sightings, the trail slowly grew cold. After nearly 2 decades of unanswered questions, the search for Savannah finally came to an end in September 2013. The authorities located Dorothy and her daughter on Australia's Sunshine Coast, where they had been living quietly for years. Dorothy had remarried in 1995, just a year after she fled with Savannah. Under her new life, she created fake names for both her and her daughter, ensuring that their real identities remained hidden from anyone who might search for them. When confronted, Dorothy claimed that her actions had been driven by fear. She alleged that Harris had been abusive, insisting this was her reason for abducting Savannah. However, the doctors who had examined the situation during the original custody battle found no evidence to support her claims. The courts had already dismissed those allegations, making her justification a matter of dispute rather than fact. After her arrest in Australia, Dorothy was extradited back to the United States to face charges. In court, she pleaded guilty to kidnapping, ending the decades-long case. The sentence handed down was 21 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Though the punishment was far less than the time she had spent in hiding, it officially closed the criminal chapter of the case. Dorothy served her prison term and upon release continued on supervised release until 2017. During that time, her daughter, now known as Samantha Geldenhuys, stood by her side. Savannah had grown up under a different name and life story, but once the truth emerged, she chose to support the mother who had raised her, even as the legal consequences played out. In 2014, Savannah was reunited with her maternal relatives, reconnecting with the family she had been separated from for so long. A year later, in 2015, she was finally reunited with her father. Despite the difficult history, Savannah expressed a hope to maintain a relationship with both her father and her mother, choosing to look toward the future rather than remain in the past. In October 1955, 3 boys from Chicago, Illinois, never returned home. For nearly 4 decades, the cases went unsolved, haunting the city and devastating the families left behind. John Schuessler was born on November 30, 1941. 2 years later, he became the older brother of Anton Schuessler Jr. Together, the 2 siblings shared a strong bond, often spending their free time enjoying activities typical of boys their age. One pastime they especially loved was bowling, a sport their father frequently encouraged by taking them to local alleys. At 13 years old, John's life had already been marked by hardship. He had previously endured serious injuries in an automobile accident. The aftermath of this trauma brought noticeable changes to his personality. Before, he had been independent, but after the accident, his mother observed that John seemed to be easily influenced and often dominated by other boys his age. This shift would shape how he interacted with peers and friends as he grew older. Anton at 11 looked up to his older brother, and their closeness was reflected in the time they spent together. John also developed a friendship with Robert Peterson, a boy who was 14 years old. Robert, like John, enjoyed sports and quickly became a central figure in the brothers' circle of friends. Robert came from a family where sports were encouraged. His father, a carpenter and little league coach, played a significant role in fostering his interest. Twice a week during the fall, Robert's father would take him bowling, strengthening both their bond and Robert's growing love for the game. This shared interest tied Robert closely to the Schuessler brothers, as bowling became a thread weaving their friendships together. It was a Sunday in October of 1955 when Robert, John, and Anton set out for what seemed like a simple afternoon trip. The boys had planned to see a matinee downtown, a movie that Robert's mother had helped them select. She suggested the Disney documentary The African Lion and sent them on their way, unaware that this would be the last time she saw her son. When the boys failed to return home, the atmosphere of calm gave way to alarm. Hours passed, and both sets of parents began to grow deeply concerned. It did not take long before the families contacted the police, reporting that their sons had not come back from the theater. The situation felt all the more urgent because the trip had been so ordinary, just an afternoon movie downtown. Worry quickly escalated into fear as the parents realized something was terribly wrong. Both fathers immediately took to the streets in search of their missing children. They first went to the theater where the boys were supposed to be, but the search yielded nothing. They extended their efforts to other nearby theaters, hoping the boys might have changed their plans. The fathers also visited a bowling alley given Robert's well-known fondness for the game. Robert, often called Bobby, had spent many afternoons bowling, and it seemed like a logical place to check. Later, it would be confirmed that the boys had indeed stopped into at least one bowling alley during that day. But despite this clue, the fathers' desperate search ended without results. 2 days later, on October 18th, the search reached a devastating conclusion. The bodies of the 3 boys were discovered in a ditch within Robinson Woods Forest Preserve, located on Chicago's northwest side. The discovery shattered any remaining hope that the children might return safely. Instead of finding them alive, the families were faced with a grim and incomprehensible reality. The details of the crime scene revealed a chilling picture of violence. When found, the boys were naked, bound, gagged, and strangled. Each death bore signs of a different method of strangulation. Anton, the youngest, had been manually strangled. His older brother John's life appeared to have been taken using a chokehold. Robert, the eldest of the group, had likely been strangled with a belt or rope. The case of the Chicago boys remained unresolved for nearly 4 decades. Despite the brutality of the crime and the intense public outcry it generated, the investigators were unable to bring the criminal to justice in the years immediately following the discovery. The reopening of the case came during a separate investigation into the 1977 disappearance of Candy Eyes Helen Voorhees Brack. This disappearance was tied to a larger scandal involving horses being killed and insurance fraud that swept through the Chicago horse world. While the investigators pursued leads connected to that scandal, attention shifted unexpectedly back to the unsolved cases of 1955. The renewed focus on the case eventually pointed toward a man with ties to the horse industry. That man was Kenneth Hansen, a former stablehand and employee of the Idle Hour stable. Hansen emerged as the primary suspect after evidence and testimony linked him. In July of 1995, he was arrested. The prosecution's case against Hansen relied heavily on witness testimony. Multiple individuals came forward claiming that Hansen had confessed to the crimes at various points in time. These alleged confessions included specific details such as Hansen picking up the boys while they were hitchhiking near Milwaukee Avenue and Lawrence Avenue, taking them to Idle Hour stable, and attempting to molest them. According to testimony, Hansen admitted that when one of the boys threatened to report him, he killed them to silence the threat. Among the testimonies, certain details stood out. One witness stated that Hansen specifically mentioned Robert by name when recounting the events. Another witness testified that Hansen confessed as early as October 1955, only days after the bodies were discovered, saying that he had just killed the 3 boys. These accounts became the foundation of the state's case against him, offering jurors a narrative that directly linked Hansen to the crime. In 1995, Hansen was convicted in a jury trial and sentenced to a term of 200 to 300 years in prison. His conviction was later overturned on appeal due to the improper admission of certain evidence, but the pursuit of justice did not end there. Hansen was retried in 2002, and once again, the jury found him guilty. He remained incarcerated until he passed away on September 13, 2007, at Pontiac Correctional Center. With his passing, the case was effectively closed, bringing an end to one of Chicago's most haunting true crime stories. In June 1980, a 14-year-old girl disappeared in Antioch, California. Decades later, the case was solved using modern DNA testing and FBI systems that had not existed at the time the case was opened. Susan Arlene Susie Bombardier was born on March 14, 1966. She grew up in Antioch, California, a community located in Contra Costa County. In 1980, 14-year-old Susan was attending Antioch Junior High School. She was an honor roll student recognized for her dedication to her studies and her ability to excel academically. Susan also took an active role in school activities. She was a member of the California Junior Scholastic Federation, a program that recognized students for academic achievement and involvement. Looking ahead, Susan had big dreams. Among them was her aspiration to try out for the cheerleading team. On June 22, 1980, Susan was spending the evening babysitting her 2 young nieces at her sister's home in Antioch. It was the very first night of summer vacation, a time when most teenagers looked forward to carefree days ahead. For Susan, the night began like any other with the simple responsibility of caring for her sister's children. When her sister returned home the next morning, everything seemed strangely out of place. Her 2 little girls were safe inside the house, unharmed and untouched, but Susan was nowhere to be found. There were no clear signs of forced entry, no broken locks or shattered windows to suggest an intruder had broken in. This unsettling discovery made her sister realize almost immediately that something was terribly wrong. Panic set in quickly. Susan's sister reported her missing to the Antioch Police Department, and the investigators began trying to piece together what might have happened. At just 14 years old, Susan's sudden disappearance was alarming to both her family and the wider community. What began as a missing person case would soon turn into something far more tragic. 5 days later, on June 27th, the search came to a devastating end. Susan's body was discovered floating in the San Joaquin River near the Antioch Bridge. The discovery shattered any remaining hope that she might still be alive. For her loved ones, the nightmare had only deepened. An autopsy revealed the grim details of her death. Susan had been inappropriately assaulted and stabbed once in the chest. The fatal wound pierced her heart, a single act of violence that ended her young life. The brutality of the crime left the investigators certain that her criminal had acted with both cruelty and intent. The police suspected early on that the criminal was likely someone who knew the family. Despite interviewing people close to Susan and pursuing various leads, the technology available in 1980 limited what the investigators could prove. With no arrest made and evidence difficult to process, the case grew cold, leaving unanswered questions and a grieving family without justice. In 2015, 35 years later, new hope emerged in Susan's case. The investigators reopened the long cold file after a friend of Susan, along with her niece, met with two retired detectives who had originally worked on the investigation back in 1980. Their determination to find answers reignited interest in the case, and with advances in forensic science, the possibility of uncovering the truth was finally within reach. As part of the renewed investigation, the police turned to modern technology. They used an FBI indexing system that had not been available at the time of the crime to examine DNA evidence preserved from the scene. This approach allowed the investigators to analyze biological material in a way that was impossible in 1980, providing a new pathway toward identifying a suspect. In 2017, their efforts paid off. A CODIS match identified Mitchell Lynn Baycom, a convicted offender who was already known to the Bombardier family as the suspect in the case. On December 11, 2017, the authorities arrested Baycom, who was then 63 years old. The arrest was made without incident, marking a major breakthrough after nearly 4 decades of unanswered questions. The case then moved through the courts. On March 15, 2022, a Contra Costa County jury found Baycom guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction carried special circumstances, including burglary, kidnapping, and assault, all tied to the horrific crime against Susan. After years of waiting, the legal system had finally delivered a verdict. On June 27, exactly 42 years after Susan's body was found, Baycom was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecutors revealed disturbing information. Baycom had allegedly confessed to a former cellmate about committing similar crimes against other victims during his time as a truck driver. This revelation painted a chilling picture of a man capable of repeated violence. For the Bombardier family, justice had finally been served, but it came at a painful cost. A detective involved in the case reflected on the outcome, acknowledging that justice did not come swiftly for Susan's loved ones. Decades of waiting, grief, and uncertainty had weighed heavily on them, and while the conviction provided closure, it also underscored the long and difficult path to accountability.